Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In this tutorial we're going to put together a very basic program using the STL graphics library. So firstly let's take a look at what STL actually is. So I'll go to a browser here. What we need for this program is we need basically a games programming library that at least lets us do graphics programming, and in particular gives us pixel level access. So if you search for C++ game library, there are various options that are going to come up. There's a whole list of them here, list of game engines. Allegro is a good one, but there are lots of them. I'm going to use one called STL. So you can follow these tutorials using any games library, basically, that lets you do pixel level access on the screen. You need to be able to manipulate individual pixels. And although I'm going to show you this example using STL, using STL2, if you're using some other version of STL or you want to use a different library, I'm going to try to give you the right kind of pointers that you could do that for yourself with some Googling. And I should just mention that learning to use Google effectively is a really great skill to have as a programmer. I use it constantly to look for example code and to look for any information I need. And if you dive into Google very readily, then it will help you a lot with your programming. So I'm going to use this STL, which stands for Simple Direct Media Layer, and this is a very kind of basic C++ games programming library. It doesn't provide you with any 3D facilities or anything that I know of. I can mention actually you could also use probably OpenGL to follow this tutorial. I think that gives you pixel level access, but that's another good library to use. STL doesn't give you 3D facilities or anything, but I like it because it's been stable for a long time and it's reliable, and I've had quite few problems compiling this for every different platform that I've worked with. Well, that's basically Mac, Linux and Windows. I had no significant trouble getting STL to work on any of those. And I have to say that having trouble getting APIs to work, particularly game APIs, that's application programming interface, by which I mean basically libraries, is a common experience. It's not always easy to get them to work, but STL is one of the easier ones to work with. So I'm going to use STL2 for this tutorial. Now, what we need here we need the header files, we need static libraries to link our program with, and STL also uses dynamic libraries which the static libraries refer to. So we also need a dynamic library which would have to be distributed with our program. It's possible, apparently, to statically link an STL program so that you're not using any dynamic libraries at all. You've just got one file to distribute. But then, by the license terms, you're obligated to distribute your source code as well. So that's not really that convenient. So either way, you can't just distribute one single file. You've got to distribute at least the DLL or the .so or whatever with it. But anyway, that's not too bad. And this is a common situation with C++ programs, which is why unfortunately installers are often necessary to distribute programs. But for this program that we're developing, you only have to distribute 2 files, so it's not too bad, your program plus the dynamic library. So what we need is the header files, the dynamic library to link with, and the static library to link with, and the dynamic library that the static library actually refers to. So that's 3 things that we need basically here. Now, if you go to the STL2 downloads page, we've got downloads for Windows here, 32-bit and 64-bit. And we've also got, actually these are just the runtime binaries, so we're going to need actual stuff to develop with. These are just the files to run your program. So if we look at development libraries, we've got one for Visual C++ for Windows. You've got one for GNU for Windows, for MinGW here. And Now we've got this DMG package for Mac, and Mac has its kind of own system of packaging programs involving something called frameworks, which I don't fully understand. And although in theory we should be able to, on a Mac, we should be able to use the SDL framework, I couldn't get that to work. And a lot of other people as well are saying that at the moment the program just crashes if they try to use this framework. So what I've done is I've used the kind of Linux version of SDL to compile this program, because Mac is a Unix-based system, so we can use the Linux version of SDL to compile programs, which I didn't have too many problems getting working. So you need to download the right file for your platform. So if you're using Windows, either the Visual C++ version or MinGW version, I don't think there's really any other choice for actual compilers for Windows. So even if you're using code blocks, you're probably using the MinGW compiler. So hopefully either of those will do the trick. If not, if you're using some other wacky compiler, or one that's just not used much, you could use a different library to follow this tutorial. You just have to Google for some examples on how to do pixel access. But hopefully you could figure that out. So for my Mac, I use the Linux version. And on Linux, if you're using Linux, usually Linux users are a bit more technically adept than the average Windows user. And hopefully you're comfortable with doing stuff on the command line. If not, you're going to have to get comfortable. But you can use, I think it's called apt-get to get the Linux SDL. You're going to have to Google for that though. And what I did on my Mac was I installed something called Mac Ports. So Mac Ports. And then I used that to get libSDL2. Very important you get SDL2. And that downloaded SDL2 for me, the SDL2 development libraries, and compiled them for me. So either way, the end target here is that you want to end up with, if you're on Windows, you're going to need a SDL.lib or SDL2.lib, it's probably going to be called. And you're going to need SDL2.dll probably as well. On Unix or Linux, you're going to need the static lib probably SDL2.a or something like that. And you're also, to distribute your program, you're also going to need lib SDL2.so probably. On the Mac, if you're using a Mac, instead of lib xyz.so, you're probably going to have xyz.dylib, but it's the same thing as the .so and as the .dll basically. They're all the same thing. So try to get that source code. That's the next step. You need to acquire these files. You need to have the header files, the static library to link with, and the dynamic library as well, which you'll need to distribute your program and for that matter to run it yourself, I suppose. Now I've done that on the Mac. As I described, I used Mac Ports to download libSDL2, and what I ended up with was this. And of course this is not going to be the same on Windows as I just described, but if I go to cd/user/ trying to remember here, let's have a look. User local /include, then I've got this SDL2 folder, and if we look in there, here are all my SDL header files. So you need all of these, whatever platform you're working on. And then if I go to /user/local/lib, of course this is only relevant for Linux type systems, and I go, and here I've actually got libSDL2.a. That's my static library, which would be called probably SDL2.lib on Windows. And here's my dynamic library, which I need to distribute with my program, libSDL2.dylib. If we just take a quick look at the Windows one, because a lot of people use Windows, of course, and it will reassure you to see that is as I say. Let's take a look, for example, at the MinGW1 here. I'll just unzip this download that I downloaded from the SDL page. You can see you've got an include directory here, and you need to copy this folder just to somewhere where you can access it. So if you have a folder that you normally put your programs in or whatever, you can put it there. It doesn't matter too much as long as it's somewhere you can find it. And we've got this lib folder here. We've got a target for like 64-bit machines and also for 32-bit machines. The reason it's called x86 is because, of course, early computers were called, like 286, 386, 486, and so on, and they were 32-bit machines. So this is actually 32-bit in spite of being called 86, and this is 64-bit. If we look in either of those folders, again, we've got the DLL file. That's the dynamic library. We've got the static library.lib, and we've also got the header files here. So once you've got those, you can proceed to the next step, which, actually, come to think of it, I'll put in the next video, because you're going to want a bit of time to acquire these libraries, download them, and check that you've got everything you need, the header files and the two kinds of library, especially if you're using Linux or Mac, because then you've got to probably download them and compile them, and you need to just Google for instructions, basically. If you go to Google and search for stuff like compile STL Linux, that sort of thing, then you'll find various instructions on there. And I appreciate that it's easy to get overwhelmed with Google results, but this is really a vital skill to learn, because if you're going to be doing C++, you are going to find yourself wanting to use Google a lot to figure out problems that you've encountered, because usually other people will have encountered the same problem. So Google is a really good thing to start getting into. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, I'll actually use the stuff I've downloaded to create finally a basic STL program, which won't do anything yet, but we'll check that we can actually get a program running. So until next time, happy coding.